Today I'm going to share my main workflow for using AI art to create a finalized design or image using Midjourney, but also with a process that applies to pretty much any AI art platform. And as an example for how this process works, we're going to create a movie poster for a film that doesn't exist called Blind Rage. And essentially I'm going to run through step by step, and you can apply this process to any AI art platform, despite the fact I'll be showing you how to do it in Midjourney. Now, before I start, I do need to actually get the aspect ratio of the image we're after. So I'm going to head into Google and do a search. Now, the first step is to find out the size of our movie poster. So if I go to Google and I type in what are the measurements of a movie poster and search, I get a few options. So if I did a one sheet, which is 27 by 40 inches, I can use that on Midjourney for my aspect ratio. So I go to Midjourney, and then on the prompt bar, I come to my drop down, and here I can type in the aspect ratio. So I'll say it's 27 by 40. So you can use any measurement you want here to get an exact result. So now we're ready to go, we can start to build our prompt. Now, because Midjourney and other AI art platforms can be a little bit of a roll of the dice, we're going to start by submitting a simple prompt and then make some adjustments and fine tune it in order to try and nail down the prompt we want before we move on to the next step. Now, on our poster, I want to have like a blind Japanese warrior and a lot of sort of carnage around him, but very centralized sort of poster layout. But for now, I want to keep it as straightforward as possible. So I'm going to start writing my prompt. Starting off with our subject, I'm going to say, I have a Japanese warrior holding a katana wearing a blindfold. And I also want this to be a movie poster, so I'm going to also add, comma, a cinematic movie poster, revenge themed. So I'm just going to start pretty basic to see what Midjourney gives us, and we're going to basically adjust from there. So I submit. Now, these are the images that we have, and we could use these as a poster straight up if we wanted to and move on from here. However, I have a very specific vision, so we're going to actually try to adjust to make that vision come to life. So we have our base prompt, which means now we have to look at the images and figure out what it is we think it's missing and try to add those into the prompt to try and correct and steer the image in the right direction. So I'm going to actually use this prompt again, and I'm going to add some details. For one, I'm going to say, I want him to wear a red blindfold, but also want him to be standing in front of a village that's on fire. So I'm going to say, in the background is a village on fire, and submit that. And then we keep making those adjustments. So the next series of images come in, and these also look pretty good. However, I really want more of a kind of a teal and orange cinematic color grading, and I want more of a full body shot of my character. So I go through, I add those into the prompt to make that adjustment, and then I submit to review the next set of results. Now we have our image. Our man isn't facing forward, so I do need to fix that. The color's also a little overdone. I want it to be more like this image here. So I'm actually going to take a step back and use this prompt again and kind of refine the adjustments I made to get something better. So this time when I adjust my prompt, I'm going to remove the mention of orange and teal and just try and hope for the best here. But I'm also going to put in here facing forward, ready stance in order to frame my subject up a little bit better. And then I'm going to submit. Now, before we move on to the results of that prompt, there's a few tips I want to tell you about editing your prompt. And that is, you don't want it to be too long because you can kind of water down some of the main points. I like the idea of focusing primarily on what you want to see and then making adjustments using the other tools. But also, moving certain phrases up towards the start of your prompt will prioritize them a bit more as well. So by moving facing forward, ready stance very close to the front as opposed to adding it to the end will give the engine a bit more of an idea that that's what I want to see as a priority. And now we're getting a little bit closer to what it is I'm after. This image here is framed the way I like it. This image has the colors I like. So what we got isn't perfect, but it's about as close as we can get without getting a little bit too kind of nitpicky. Now we can simply resubmit over and over again or try to vary in order to see what we can get. But I'm going to move on to the next step, and that is to refine the results we've been able to generate using other tools. Now I can experiment with taking this image, so I can go very subtle or very strong, but I'm going to click on it, and where it says remix, I can go remix subtle. And we've got plenty of orange in there and plenty of like firiness. So I'm going to add in the end here, slight teal tint, cinematic color grade. So now when I do make a few adjustments to the prompt, I'm actually not just submitting a raw prompt. I'm actually using an image reference to try and nail down the layout, because I've got a layout I like. Now I just need to make changes within that layout. So using Remix on Midjourney is a great way to do that. And if you're using another platform, there are things like image prompting or edge to image, which can also assist with getting that layout and using it for the next image you're trying to generate. So I have this here, I have my prompt, and now I've just simply asked for the color. I submit, and we got a little bit closer to what we're after. There's a bit of teal here in the actual kimono. I don't really want this lettering, but we're going to deal with that in a little bit. But what I can do is I've adjusted my prompt to a point where I've got the image I want, and now I'm using Remix to slowly control what it is I'm after. So I'm going to click on this again, go to Remix, Subtle, and it will remix from this image instead of the previous image. And I like the details of this image more anyway. Now where it says slight teal tint, I'm going to just remove the word slight. I'm actually going to take this information, like the teal tint, the cinematic color grade, and I'm going to move it forward to after wearing a blindfold. So the closer it is to the start of the prompt, the more impact it should have. So I have cinematic color grade with teal and orange tint further up in the prompt to try and prioritize it. So making little adjustments, understanding where to move things forward, and using Remix to kind of hold the layout, I'm able to now kind of pin it down a little bit and make my changes. Now with these minor adjustments I've made with the prompt, it's taking us so far and getting us some decent, slightly different results, but I think it's time to escalate things. We can start using what's called a style reference to apply some of the colors to that image. So this is how you can kind of problem solve some of the issues while you're adjusting in order to get the image you're after. Now we've gotten closer again, but still not what we want. So again, I can take this image, Remix Subtle, but this time I'm going to come down the side here because this image has the colors that I like. So I'm going to drag it up as a style reference. So I have my image here, but I have this as a style reference. Now, if you're not using Midjourney, style reference is available in most of the AI art platforms out there. However, these are just some of the tools that I can use for this process specifically for this image. There are so many other tools you can use to problem solve these things. So I just want to mention, if you want to go more in depth on the tools for Midjourney specifically, then I have a comprehensive Midjourney course, which I'll leave a link to in the description below if you want to check that out. But back to our video, because we've added our style reference along with our remix. Now, the default score of 100, it may try to change some of the pose. So I'm going to come up here and type in --SW for style weight. I'm going to half it to about 50 because I just want it to copy the color, and I can still adjust this as I go. But essentially, we've got a prompt where we've nailed down the layout. We've now added a style reference to take a little bit more control over the color and general feel of the image. So now I submit. Now we've managed to get it a bit better, but it's still not exactly what we're after. But what I'm actually going to do now is move on to taking a little bit more control over the final result. So now we're going to move on to the next step, which is to edit the finer details. Now, any of the best AI image generators out there generally will have an AI editor attached to its platform. So Midjourney obviously has this as well, or Vary Region is what it used to be called. But we're going to go in, and since we can't quite get the color exactly where we want it, and we want to sort of check out and edit some of the details, I'm going to go in and use the editor to refine what we have, because most of the colors are there, they're just not exactly where we want them. So I've got this image here, it's still very orange in the background. So what I'm going to do now is go into edit. Now I'm inside the normal sort of Vary Region editor, but I want the full external editor. So I'm going to go down to edit and open in the edit tab. Now before I go ahead and try and fix the color, I already know there are a few things I want to do with this image. For example, I wanted a full body shot, so I want him to be sort of zoomed out a little bit, and I want some space to put my title up here when I'm done. So I'm going to go to move and resize, and I'm going to just move him down a little bit, place him roughly in the center. The other thing is, I don't really want these symbols here or the text down the bottom. So I'm going to get paint, bring my brush size down, and just kind of remove those areas. And because we already have some reference here, what I can do is when I use the prompt, I don't have to worry about describing a cinematic movie poster or even a lot of the subject. I can keep it a lot simpler in order to highlight some of the things I really want. But I am going to bring the brush size up a little bit and get rid of some of the background. So now I have a lot of what I'd like to see, and I can start to add in a little of what I want to see around this image. So I'm going to come up to what will you imagine? And I type in my prompt, which is, I have a Japanese warrior, a burning village in the background with a strong teal colored tint. So you can see now how we're able to even further lock down parts of the image, and now we can focus on changing just the elements and areas of the image we actually want to change. So using the editor means that as we get closer and closer, we start to lock certain things down, and then we can actually make adjustments to the areas we need to fix. Now with that editor prompt, I do recommend actually submitting a couple of times to see what you can get, because editors can be a little fickle when it comes to AI art platforms. Now I managed to get some results that add a little bit of teal, but still not a lot. However, I submitted a few times and one of these actually looks pretty good. So just remember, you can always simply submit again, and then I can go through and see which one I think is going to look best. This one so far I think is the best. I want a little bit more teal in there, but the good news is now we have at least a bit, I can now start to kind of work in a little bit more. So maybe I decide I'm going to remove some of this. Some of this area is not too bad. I'm going to actually get a little bit more aggressive where some of the orange is and try and keep the teal in there, because I can slowly kind of move in on the areas that I want to adjust. So as you can see, with each step, I get a little bit more of what I want, and I just need to keep slowly moving in to fix up the finer, smaller areas that I need to work on. So I still want some fire in there, but by maintaining the presence of this teal up the top here and some over here, I can guide the editor a little bit further and hopefully get it to creep in over time. So I would submit that. So once again, just simply rinse and repeat, keep doing that process and editing the finer areas until you're basically happy with the image and ready to move on. So that brings me to the next step. Our images are actually not really high resolution, so we need to upscale them to a much higher resolution, adding the detail while still keeping the core of the image the same. So now that I've got this here ready to go, I head over to Upscale to Gallery. Now what that actually does is it doubles the resolution of that image. So at the moment, it's only 896 by 1328. By doubling it, we get it up to 1792 by 2656, which still isn't big enough for print, but there's a little bit more to the process, which we're going to get to soon. And now our image has been upscaled. However, this image is still not big enough for print, but we have squeezed as much information out of Midjourney as we can to get the best results possible. So I'm going to download this image. I then open up Topaz Gigapixel. Now Topaz Gigapixel isn't free, and you can use whatever upscaler you sort of prefer, but I recommend Topaz Gigapixel. I believe it does the best job and also has both generative and just standard AI upscalers. So I use Topaz Gigapixel because I can pay once and do everything locally on my machine, but you can also try out Bloom if you want to check that out as well. But I drag my image in, and I have some choices down the right here, and I really want to use redefine, either realistic or creative. I'm going to start with realistic. I'm going to move up to about where the face is, and you can see the detail, even without the pixelation, is a little smooth. So I click on this to render a preview, and I can see it's improved it a little bit. So with the creativity at none, that's not too bad. But if I add subtle creativity, I can actually add in an image description. So what I'm going to do is head back to Midjourney. I'm going to go to copy, prompt. I head back to Topaz, paste the prompt in, making sure I get rid of any of the parameters. So that way, Topaz Gigapixel has the same information that Midjourney did when creating the image as to where we want this to go. So again, I click here to preview, and that is looking a lot better. There's even a little bit of an eye poking through, which is actually not a bad touch. Now I could run with this, but again, I'm going to copy the prompt now that we've removed the parameters, and redefine realistic with subtle. Looks not too bad. But I'm going to head back and check out what redefine creative looks like. So I have the same prompt in here. We've got creative low, medium, and high. I'm actually going to go straight to medium, because the higher up this goes, the more detail gets added. But the further away it goes from the original image. So now I'm going to preview this section, and I think this is spot on. I can try with other levels, but I'm really happy with that. It's got the right amount of detail added while still sticking close enough to the original image. So now that I've got that ready to go, I'm going to leave it on a 2x upscale. Now, this still won't be quite big enough for a movie poster, but going any further than this resolution actually is not really necessary for the detail of the image, and will just simply slow down your computer. If you really want to, and you can get away with it, you could go for a 3x or a 4x, even up to a 6x, but it's going to take a long time to generate. So I'm going to stick with a 2x upscale and export this image. Now I've got a pretty decent computer and it's nothing fancy. It takes about 15 minutes to perform a 2x upscale. It takes a lot longer if you go higher than that on this computer, it does anyway. So it's just something to be aware of, but you don't really need much more detail than that. We are actually going to upscale again with something that's a little lower powered in order to get that extra resolution while still keeping the quality of the image. And now that our image has been upscaled, check out the level of detail we've now got in our image, originally generated with Midjourney, upscaled with Topaz Gigapixel. Now you can get some pretty good results with Bloom too. I believe it's a little bit more creative than this, but you can just see the detail. But there are some things in here we don't want as well, but that's okay, because the main part of the process is I always like to add a bit of control to what I'm doing. But what I'm actually going to do now is I'm not going to just stop there, because even though this is a pretty decent sized image at 3584 by 53 12 pixels. I still want to maximize it a bit more, but I just don't need to add a ton more detail. So this time I'm actually going to go back to Topaz Gigapixel. I close this window and I'm actually going to remove that image. I then take the upscale I just created and pop it in there. Now I don't want to do this again because this will take a while, but you can see that we got our more detailed image. But this time I'm going to go out of Redefine Creative and choose one of our standard models like High Fidelity. High Fidelity is a great model for taking already decent resolution images and upscaling them. So now with a simple 2x upscale with High Fidelity, our image is going to be over 10,000 pixels tall by 7,000 pixels wide. I don't see any need for the image to be any bigger than that, even if it's not technically 300 dpi. But you can see if I go here to our preview, it does a great job anyway with those details. So with our second upscale being a little less sort of power hungry, I then go to export and submit that as well. And now our image is absolutely gargantuan compared to what it was. We've gone from an image that was only about 2,000 pixels tall to well over 10,000 pixels tall. Added a heap of detail and then increased the size of it again and smoothed out that resize process a little bit. So this means we have an image that we can start to work with that has every ounce of resolution we need. And that brings us to the next step, which is we're going to now use a photo editor to add the final touches to our image. Now you might be wondering why we're using a photo editor when we're talking about an AI art process. Well, this is the process I recommend, especially if you want to be a professional. Using something like Photoshop to make the touches that you want is going to give you so much more control over the final image that it's just going to be so difficult or almost impossible to do with AI. Finer details can be controlled in programs like Photoshop where you have a skill. If you don't have photo editing skill, I highly recommend you go and actually learn how to use a program like Photoshop if you really want to get that final polish to your images. But also when it comes to text, I recommend actually using text tools, not using AI generated text at this stage, because AI generated text is hard to control when you can just simply type out what you want, change the font, move it around, and again, you have more control and it's not exactly difficult to do. So I drag this image into Photoshop so I can start editing. Now, a few things I want to mention is we've got a few guys here in the background. I didn't really want any people in the background of this image, so I can easily fix that with generative fill. All I need to do is I'm going to take my lasso tool and select one of these guys at a time. There is a resolution limit with generative fill, so I don't want to select everything at once. Just going to select this one area here, hit generative fill, and leaving it blank, I'm going to hit generate, and it's removed it from the image. I then review and do that to any other parts of the image where I want to remove someone. Now I can do things like adjust colors or even make edits to the photo, change bits and pieces around, but for now I just want to focus on cleaning up the image you already have and sticking to some basic edits. If you want something a little bit more in depth, I'll leave a video card at the end of this video or a link in the description below for Photoshop skills I think AI artists should use to improve their images. So I've cleaned up the image, and I don't want to get too caught up in editing this image. I've got a full video I'm going to share with you soon that can help you do that, but there are some basic edits I'd like to make as I believe that this is a crucial part of having full control over the final output. The first thing I'm going to do is, before I had trouble really getting the teal in on this image, so I'm going to actually grab my brush tool and select this teal color. Okay, and then when I go to my layers here, you can see all the generative fills we've created. I'm going to add a new layer, bring that brush size right up, keeping the hardness down, and I can start to draw some teal in. Now I don't want to just paint this on as is. I'm going to actually hit color as a blend mode, because now I can start to influence the colors of the image. I want to keep the flames pretty much where they are. So now I'm just going to go through and add that teal color in around some of the areas where I'd like it to be, but I don't want it to be too close and overtake some of the flames. I just want to add a bit more teal into the background to get that look I had envisioned. Now keeping in mind we can also adjust things like color, but I think the color is pretty good the way it is. I don't want to get too caught up in it. One thing I do want to do though is I want to darken this top bit. So I'm going to again select this color, go a bit darker, almost close to black. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to, once again, crank up that brush size. I'm going to just darken that here so it gets a nice glow. And then I'm going to add another layer to kind of create a border. I just want to paint this in here. And I'm going to bring the opacity down a bit so we've got like a little bit of a border, and that way our character is glowing a little bit. And so it's a pretty simple process. I'm actually just going to sort of touch it up, let the flames come through a little bit. Also notice a little bit of text in the bottom corner, so I'm just going to use generative fill to remove that as well. And then I want to move on to adding some text to add the title of our poster. So I would say our image is pretty much spot on. I've got the teal I wanted. I've got a nice fiery glow around our subject, which really highlights him. And now, if I wanted to, I could add all these little details down the bottom here for our poster. So if you have information there, you want to just grab, say, like a text tool, type it in there. But I'm just going to focus on our title for now. Our title is Blind Rage. So I'm going to grab my text tool and just type in blind. Now you can barely see that because the color is dark. So I'm going to come up here, make the color white. And I'm also going to choose a different font. I'm going to go with the font Lulo for this particular one, but you can search for anything you like. For what I have envisioned, I think this actually looks pretty good because I want the word rage to be a little bit more crazy. Now I want it to be perfectly centered, so I'm hitting tab to turn the UI on and off, but I'm going to hit Control A to select the whole canvas. Click on my move tool here and choose center to perfectly center that text. Then follow the same process for rage, choosing a font which I think makes sense for the tone of the poster. I think this font looks alright, so I'm going to bring it up. So we've got Blind Rage. Now, our guy is kind of in the way. I am going to make the text a little bit smaller. Maybe I can change the layout, put rage to the right, blind to the left, but I kind of want that centered look. So I'm going to just click on blind, Control T, hold down Alt, I can just kind of move that, bring it up a little bit. And maybe rage, I can hit Control T for free transform and just kind of put this here. Got this nice rough looking font. Now what would really be cool is if our guy was sitting in front of the font. So what I can do now is come down, click on the background image. Again, I hit select subject. And you'll see it's selected our subject here. I'm going to duplicate this layer and mask it. I'm going to bring it up above our lettering so it cuts it off. Now I could possibly stop there, but there's something about the plain text that just bothers me. So I'm going to do something like add a shadow by going into the layers, into the blending options. I can add a shadow in that way pretty easily that will sort of like sit behind the text. But on top of that, I just want to kind of like get that rough look that the rest of the poster seems to have. So I'm going to go to Pixels and find a concrete texture or something similar. And then we're going to bring that into Photoshop, make some basic adjustments to add that final touch. So I'm going to come over to my layers, hold down Shift to select both layers, create a group. I then drop and drag our image from Pixels into the top bar to open it in a new document. And I'm just going to sort of crop out this part. Hit Control Shift U to desaturate it to black and white. Then I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, Curves, and I'm going to bring this black corner here in so we get a nice dark area. Bring this white top corner up so we can bring out some of the white. Hit OK. Control I to invert. So there's a lot of steps here, but I brought that in, adjusted it to black and white, and inverted it so that we get the black areas I want to basically be missing from the text. So now I've got this selected, I hit Control C to copy, come back over to where my blind rage is. I'm going to go down to my quick mask down here, or hit Q on my keyboard. I paste that in and move it up. And you can see where the little blemishes are, so I want to make sure I get those on my text. So I think that looks pretty good there. And then hit Q to exit, and whatever was white is now selected. So I have my group here, and you can see it contains our text. I now hit the mask button, and it's masked that group and created like a texture over that text. Now that I can see that as a final product, I decided that I just want to change the color of Rage slightly. So I went in there and made it a bit of a light sort of creamy color. And then now we have our final result. And this is our final result, which I think when you scroll down and look at the detail, it looks really incredible. Especially when you consider the fact we've created in Midjourney, made a lot of finer edits, upscaled it, and then used Photoshop to add in those final touches of control. The final result, I think, turned out pretty good. But now there's still one more thing we need to do, which is to make sure we have the correct resolution for print. I know we've upscaled it to quite a big size, but we're also printing a poster that is very large. Now, you don't necessarily need a 300 dpi image for a massive poster, especially the size that we were looking at for this image. But for the sake of the exercise, let's say we want to create that poster at 300 dpi. Now coming back to Google, I'm going to search for, I have 27 by 40 inches, which was the measurement width and height. But I'm going to type in at 300 dpi at the end. I submit that, and you see it gives us a pixel resolution of 8100 by 12,000 pixels. Now our image is actually slightly under that, but because of the amount of detail we have, we can go straight back into Photoshop, go to image, size, and just simply take it up to 81,000. I've got nearest neighbor selected. We don't want that. We kind of want to go with preserve details 2.0. Hit OK. And now we literally have a 300 dpi full poster size image. And if we zoom right in, the resolution is still pretty solid. And now you can finally export that file as PDF, JPEG, whatever it is you want to do, and send it off to be printed if that is indeed what you wanted to do. Now, if you look at the file information and it says 300 dpi or it doesn't say 300 dpi, just ignore that information and ask for a particular size when you get it printed, because DPI is dependent on the size of the print, and a lot of people, they get confused because they look at files and say, well, this is only 72 dpi, when in actual fact, the actual DPI is dependent on how many pixels per inch of print. So technically, if you have an image that's 100 by 100 pixels, which is really tiny, it's technically 300 dpi as long as you print it at 1/3 by 1/3 of an inch, which is obviously pretty tiny. So if you then moved it up to 1 inch by 1 inch of print, it then becomes 100 dpi because you've stretched it out and made the pixels cover more space. So calculating the pixels per inch of measurement is how you calculate DPI. So I do get a lot of comments, people confused about that, so I just want to explain that, but that's essentially what you need to do. Now that is the process that I have for today. Now it's only one process of many. There are different ways to do completely different things, to create images in different ways. Also, if you need to include people or objects, it just changes, the game changes depending on what it is you're after. But if you want me to share more processes or workflows like this, please let me know with a comment below. Otherwise, what I also wanted to ask is if you want to see me create certain art projects or images and share those processes with you to give you some insight into how I can make things happen from A to B so that you can use those for your own projects, let me know in the comments also. Otherwise, that is the video for today, guys. And if you're looking for more information on Midjourney or the more in-depth details of something like this, check out my Midjourney course, linked to in the description below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon and have a great day.